Hello everybody, welcome back to another video. In this video, I want to tell you guys about cubes. What are cubes? What's the difference between cubes? And why is it so important to know the difference between them? I actually get asked this question a lot, like when should I use certain cubes in what situations? Why should I buy this cube over another cube? Or what they even do in the first place. So this video is going to cover all of that. And of course, if you get some sort of value from this video, I would greatly appreciate if you would subscribe. I really do appreciate that. Pull up to the live stream so you can ask any questions you want or have a good time. There's also the Discord that you can join where you can meet a lot of people and get help with whatever you want. So basically, what a cube does in this game, depending on the type of cube you use, it allows you to re-roll what's called a potential on your gear. So when you hover over and equip, at the bottom, it'll say a potential line, and that potential line could be various different ranks, and you'll get some sort of percentage increase to some sort of stat in the game. So for me as a warrior, high-idle player, I would want strength. So this item, for example, has strength percent increases, and I would use those cubes to re-roll those values to hopefully get what I want. And different cubes have different types of functions. So some cubes only allow you to re-roll up to a certain rank, and some cubes allow you to choose a before and after. Most of the cubes in the game, once you re-roll it, that's it. It gets re-rolled and you can't save what you had before. But some cubes in the game, like these bright cubes, they allow you to save what you had before and you get a before and after option. But it's actually much deeper than that. They also have a lot of other functions too, depending on the cube that you have. So there are 5 primary types of cubes on the heroic world. There are mystical cubes, hard cubes, solid cubes, glowing cubes, and bright cubes. Now, mystical, hard, and solid, these 3 cubes, you can get them for free. You get them from doing daily bosses, weekly bossing, training when you kill E-mobs. You could get them from event shops or event check-ins, like for example in the Demon Slayer event that you could get solid cubes from here. But these solid cubes in particular, sometimes you'll get free ones that only work on specific items. So for example, this one, it says event ring exclusive solid cube, meaning it only works on event rings. But sometimes you could just get cubes that work on anything. But long story short, these 3 are the free ones and these are the paid ones, glowing cube and bright cube. So to buy glowing cubes and bright cubes, you have to go to a cubing vendor that you could find in any town, or if you have an Android, you can buy it with Mesos. And you could buy various packs from 10 to 200 for glowing and bright cubes. And glowing and bright cubes, yes, they might seem very expensive, but they're actually very strong. And once you have Meso drop gear, you'll be able to afford them pretty regularly. So if you go to any town in the game, top left quick move, you'll see a cube shop, and this is where you can buy them if you don't have an Android on you that allows you to buy them anywhere you want. So let's talk about what each cube does, and we'll start from the bottom to the top. So mystical cubes, you'll get by far the most of these throughout playing MapleStory. You'll get thousands, probably tens of thousands once you get pretty deep into the game of these cubes. If you read what it says at the bottom, max result epic. So what that means is these cubes can only work on items that are either rare or epic potential. So if we go back to this ring that I had before, we can re-cube it with this item. It'll allow us to keep cubing it and try to get what we want off of epic gear. So these cubes are very good for the hyper early game when you can't really afford anything higher than the epic tier. So it's really good to use these to try and get anywhere between 3 to 6% of whatever stat you desire. But for example, if I were to try and use this cube on this arcane weapon, which is legendary, it wouldn't let me. It actually says in chat, mystical cubes can only reset items up to epic rank. Now, what's also interesting about these cubes, so we have this source of suffering here. On the bottom left, it says rare potential. So there's actually a very small chance that these cubes can tier up your item. And that's the secondary function of cubes, is that they can tier up an item to go from a lower rank to a higher rank. So for example, there is a pretty low chance that we tier up from rare to epic, but it's not really worth doing that because these cubes have such a low chance to tier up that you'll burn through so many of them and it's just not worth it. A better option to tier up from rare to epic would be using these hard cubes, which you can get from bossing, daily bossing, weekly bossing, killing mobs. You'll get a lot of these eventually just from killing a lot of bosses. Now, not every single store has hard cubes available for purchase. You can get a lot of them from events like I mentioned, but in particular, the Genesis shop has hard cubes that you can purchase, and they're actually pretty good from tiering up an item from specifically rare to epic. I wouldn't really bother using them from epic to unique. You could. There is a decent chance that it tiers up from epic to unique, especially if you have a lot of these. Like for someone like me that I boss on a lot of characters, I'll get hundreds of these a week. So it's really good to get items from epic to unique with them. But if you're an early game player watching this, you probably won't have access to that many of these cubes unless there's an event that gives you a lot of them. So I would only recommend using them to get an item from rare to epic. Like this source of suffering that we had before, there's a pretty decent chance that it tiers up to epic because these cubes have a much higher chance, like I just showed, to tier up a item from rare to epic versus those like shitty mystical cubes that we used earlier. Now, there's actually a chance that it tiers up to unique. That's the difference with these hard cubes, is you can actually go to unique. But the chance to go from epic to unique with hard cubes, those green ones, is pretty low. So generally, people don't do that unless they have a lot of them. So usually they'll use bright cubes to tier up, which we'll talk about in a bit. Now, the next cube is solid cubes. Now, these, you can also get them from bossing. You can get them from event shops. Now, what's really cool about these is you can tier up an item all the way to legendary with them, but that's actually not recommended to do because it's actually more cost effective to use bright cubes to go from epic to legendary than these solid cubes. So what these cubes are best used for is they're almost the exact same as a glowing cube. So what that means is they can re-roll items that are already legendary, which is pretty valuable because once an item is legendary, you cannot use mystical cubes to roll it, and you cannot use these hard cubes that we showed earlier. You can't use these two to roll a legendary item. You have to use one of these three to roll a legendary item: solid cube, glowing cube, or bright cube. So a solid cube, you could think of it as almost a free version of a glowing cube because it allows you to re-roll legendary. So for example, I have this Absolab glove here that has 7% auto steal on it, right? So if I wanted to re-roll it, I can't use these cubes because it doesn't let me. Like, these things only go up to epic and unique respectively, but I can use the solid cube. Now, the reason why I say that solid cube isn't the exact same as glowing cube is because the solid cube actually has a different pool of potential lines that you can get from glowing cube. Glowing cube actually has a better potential pool, meaning you'll probably get the stats you desire from glow cubes easier than a solid cube, but it's not too big of a difference to the point that like you wouldn't want to at least use the solid cubes to try and get something that you want. So for example, I would want to get crit damage on gloves naturally, right? So I could use free solid cubes to try and get them. But what's interesting about solid cubes is they have a chance to roll auto steal percent like I have on my glove here, and you actually can't get that potential line with these two cubes. You can only get them through the solid cubes, which is very interesting. It's very weird that it works that way. But as you can see, it can re-roll legendary, which has pretty good value. And I've seen people roll really big lines with free solid cubes. I've seen people roll 3-line attack, 3-line magic attack, and whatever. So now let's talk about glowing cubes and bright cubes. These are the main two cubes that you're going to spend money on in the game, and these are the main two that you're going to get all of your gains from. So for me, on all of my gear, I either use glowing cubes or bright cubes to get all of the potential lines that I want, and this is just what you're going to have to get used to. Those 3 cubes that we mentioned earlier, those are the free ones. You use them kind of like a bonus, or if you're really early game, they have some good value. But long term, once you get a lot of money from training and bossing, these are the main cubes that you're going to be using. So let's talk about glowing cubes. So glowing cubes, you use them to re-roll items that are already at legendary. You don't necessarily want to use them to tier up an item from epic to legendary. Now, you could use them to tier up an item from all the way from rare all the way to legendary, but it's not as efficient. Bright cubes have the highest chance to tier up something, so you would use bright cubes to tier up your items starting at epic. Now, the next thing that we got to talk about that might be a little bit confusing for you guys, but is something that's very, very important to understand, is what's the difference from a prime line and a non-prime line. You have to understand what that means, because once you understand what that means, you'll understand what these cubes do. So for example, if we look at this source of suffering's potential, it says strength 13%, strength 10%, and strength 10%. So why are there 2 values of strength? Why is one of them 13 and why is one of them 10? Why aren't all of them 13 and why aren't all of them 10? So what you need to know about potentials is each line of potential is different from the others and has a different rate of getting a certain potential. So for example, the top line being 13% means that that's the maximum amount of strength that you can get per line on an item. So for example, this potential, it says 13, 13, 10. So I have 2 13%, meaning I hit the maximum amount 2 times on the first and second line. But you'll never, ever, ever see the top line in particular be 10%, for example, because the top line is what's called a prime line. line. So a prime line is the maximum amount that you can get per given potential. So for example, if we're talking about strength percent, the maximum amount, so therefore the prime line would be 13%, and the non-prime line would be 10%. So if we go back to this item, since we have two 13%, that means we hit the prime line 2 times, and people call that a double prime. So we hit a double prime on this item because we hit the maximum value for the strength line 2 times. Now, hopefully that wasn't a little too confusing, but it's very important to know that because bright cubes have a higher chance to give you prime lines than glowing cubes. So therefore, if you're trying to get a potential like this, 13, 13, 10, that has multiple prime lines in it, you would always use bright cubes to try and do that. Now, this is something that's more end game. You would never do this as an early game player. You would never fish for these prime lines. But it's important to explain this to you because some people think that because glowing cubes are cheaper and you could get more of them, it would result in getting better potentials faster. But that's not necessarily true. You would want to use the bright cubes that are more expensive, but they have a higher chance to give you prime lines. So then you might ask, why don't I always just use bright cubes? Because they have a chance to give you better potentials, right? So the reason why you don't want to do that is because it's very cost inefficient and you don't actually get that much stronger from getting these double prime line type potentials. So as you're doing your progression in this game, you want to slowly work your way up in terms of potentials. You'd want to start with something like 13, 10, 10 once you're fixing your potentials. And then maybe once you're hyper endgame, you'd want to go for the ultra expensive min-max double prime potentials. You don't want to go from an item that's like 1 line and then think like, oh, in the end, I'm going to end up at double prime anyways. So why don't I just skip everything else along the way and just go straight for the double prime? It's not going to work out well. You're going to waste so much money and you're not going to be that strong. Anyway, so let's go back to glowing cube and bright cube and talk about the difference between them. So glowing cubes, they only allow you to re-roll a potential, right? You don't get a before and after prompt either. You just re-roll it. Now keep in mind that the top line is always prime. So if you're going for just 1 line of something or 2 lines of something, let's say I want 2 lines of strength, for example, on this glove, which there you go. There's my 2 lines of strength. Glowing cubes would be better to do that because the first line is always guaranteed prime, right? We know that the first line will always be the maximum value. So you don't need to use bright cubes to get a higher chance of a prime line because the first line is always prime, right? So now we're just looking for any amount of strength on the second or third line, which is what glowing cubes are good for. Because we don't necessarily need another prime line, we could save money by using the glowing cubes, and then we could get 2-line gear pretty easily. Now, glowing cubes are actually pretty good at getting just like this. It's actually pretty funny. Glowing cubes are actually pretty good at getting 3 lines of potential that look like this in particular, 1 prime line and 2 regular lines. So they're actually the most efficient use for getting 3 lines. So for example, like an emblem, if you want attack, 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 but not multiple prime lines, then you would use glowing cubes because you can save a lot of money by guaranteeing yourself only the first line being prime, because that's just the way that the game works, and the second lines could be whatever. But now let's say we want to use bright cubes. Let's say we want to upgrade an item like this, for example, and we want that hyper min max, like we already used glowing cubes on it, we hit 3 line, and now we want to use bright cubes on it because we want to get multiple prime lines and we're like super end game, and that's what we want to do. So this is where bright cubes are really good because it gives you a before and after, so therefore you don't lose your potential that you worked so hard to get before, and it has a higher chance to give you prime lines. So because it has a higher chance to give you prime lines, this is actually so stupid. This would be the best way to get a double prime. But like I said, this is something that's like for very, very, very end game activities. This is not something that you would normally do with your mesos, unless you're at least to the point where I am on this character, to be honest with you, bare minimum. But anyways, the best use of bright cubes that you're gonna find when you're very early into the game is for tiering up items. So because bright cubes have the highest chance to tier up something, you would want to use them on items that are epic or higher, so epic or unique, and then there's a pretty decent chance that it tiers up to the next rank. There's also a chance that it could double tier up and go from epic to legendary, which is really rare. I've only seen it happen a few times. So just to reiterate what all of the cubes do, mystical cubes are really good for early game and allow you to get anything between 3 to 6% on rare or epic gear. Hard cubes can tier up your item from rare to epic or even to unique if you have a lot of them, and allow you to re-roll items that are unique or below. And then solid cubes allow you to tier up an item to legendary, but that's not efficient because the chances are so low. So you would only really use these to reroll items that are already legendary, kind of like how glowing cubes work. And then glowing cubes, which are the paid ones you get from mesos, they allow you to reroll items that are already legendary, but they don't give you a before and after prompt. And these are also the best types of cubes to get what's called regular 3 lines that only has one prime line, which is the first line, and then the next 2 lines are just the same line but non-prime. And then bright cubes are the most expensive ones, but they give you a before and after prompt like this, so you don't risk destroying your original potential if you already have something good. And they also have the highest chance to tier up an item. I would only recommend using them, honestly, from epic gear and above to tier up, because if your item is at rare, you should just use hard cubes to tier it up because you'll get these for free, and they're also much cheaper than bright cubes. So you would never use bright cubes to get a potential like this. Even if your item was like 12.9% already, like it was already 2-line, you would just save a bunch to get glowing cubes and then keep rolling it until you get the clean 3-line. Bright cubes are best used for double primes like this or just tiering up. Now, certain things that are prime lines that you might not intuitively know is meso and drop. So meso obtained and item drop rate are actually considered prime lines. So if you want to get 2 lines of these, you would use bright cubes. But if you only want 1 line like this, since the top line is guaranteed to always be prime, then you would use glowing cubes to get it. Another thing is crit damage. Crit damage is known as a prime line. So if you want multiple crit damage lines, then you would use a bright cube. And it's actually the same with cooldown as well. Skill cooldown -2 seconds and -1 second are both prime lines. So you would use bright cubes if you would need this as well. But that's about it for this video. If you have any questions, leave a comment down below. Let's all help each other out here. Of course, join the Discord. You could always find answers there and ask whatever questions you want. And pull up to the stream so you can see me keep queuing my gear. And hopefully I hit and don't get screwed over. Anyways, I appreciate you guys for watching. Subscribe if you haven't. Take care and have a wonderful day. Shout out to my members: Blazefire, Shooms, Shagad, Ravi Espa, Koga, Skittles, Dante Victory, CK, Jay, Kyle, Vampiric X, Fresh and Juicy, Assassin, Henzo, Henrique, and Kelvin. I appreciate you guys so much. And thank you everybody who submitted fan art. You can always submit it in the Discord and it'll be put at the end of every video. Thank you for watching. Have a wonderful day.